afternoon, everyone. The audio isn't working.
I can hear you.
What we got on here? Nikki. All right, I think the supervisor is on, so we can call the meeting to order, right?
Would you like for me to pull up the agenda?
Yes.
Thanks. I've got it. So looks like the audio recording is underway. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And roll call starting with Corky.
Corky Colliers here.
Nancy,
Nancy Hendrickson is here.
Ken,
Ken Anderton is here.
and Nikki.
Nikki Schultz is here.
And this is Mike Wells, president. Do we have any public testimony?
I believe we will have public testimony today. We do have a member of the public on the line, Ernest.
Can you read through the public testimony process to make sure everybody's aware?
Sure, since we haven't had public testimony in a while, I'm going to read a statement to refresh everyone's memory. The public testimony portion of the agenda is the opportunity for members of the public to provide comment on agenda items, other topics, or other topics related to the district. You'll be asked to state your name for the record and tell the chair if your comments relate to a specific item on today's agenda. Staff will call you to give your comments during public testimony once everyone has been identified. We ask that you remain muted when not giving testimony. Public testimony be limited to 3 minutes per person. Remarks should be directed to the district board as a body, not the audience or staff. Do not repeat testimony that has already been provided in print or verbally. If you wish for a staff member to follow up with you to provide additional background information on a meeting topic, you may leave your email address or phone number in the chat box. As a reminder, the recording of this meeting and anything written in the chat box is considered public record. In order to conduct regular business as set forth in the agenda, we ask everyone be respectful of their time to speak. And it looks like we do have a few folks on the call. Is anyone interested in providing testimony today?
I am. Ernest Gauze is.
Ernest, all right, go ahead, thank you.
So the questions I had is in regard to some of the billing processes and practices, and maybe this is documentation that may already exist. And looking at the agenda, I don't think it directly relates to any topic on the agenda, so this would fall up under other topics. My name is Ernest Gauze. I live at 931 Northeast South Shore Road in Portland. And I think that was all the identifying information that you said need to be stated, correct?
That's correct, thank you.
Okay. All right, so my question to the board is, when MCDD provides services to one or the other drainage district, when it comes to your billing practices, is that based on policies and agreements that you guys have published? Meaning that when you bill a board, how is that billing actually determined? So that's one of my questions. And then my other question would be, is that when the MCDD decides to invoice a drainage district, who approves that invoice? Or does that invoice come before the board, or is it decided by a single individual? And so the other question I had is that, does the MCDD provides an itemized list of invoices of services that they actually provide? Meaning that do you provide the service first and you bill second, Or is the billing put together in a quote and then is approved by the board in which you are providing actual services? And then my other question is that, does that require approval from the board that you are providing services to prior to you providing that service? Meaning that, do you provide the service first and then take the bill to that board for their approval? Do they know what they're actually spending when you provide those services? And if there's a change to those services, does that board approve the changes first, or do you change it on your own as the service provider and then make the board aware after the fact, after that service has been delivered? And then also, does the MCCD board, do they describe the charges if you decide to change those services? Do you require to make that receiving board, call it PIN 2, that you've actually changed the services that you delivered? Do you guys require approval prior to you delivering those services, or do you change those services and then make them aware after the fact?
This is Mike Wells, president of the board, and I can take a stab at answering those questions. I might ask Peggy to listen carefully and correct me if I'm off base. I think I have 6 questions I've tracked here. One is, yes, we do have a contract of services between MCDD and the other districts. And periodically the prices, charges, and rates are adjusted or updated in that contract. And some of that contract is for scope certain that repeats every year. Some of it is for special projects, and the special projects are scoped in advance, and the whole board of each district then pre-approves before that happens. The routine repetitive are scoped once and then repeated as long as the scope remains substantially similar. If there's deviation from the scope that's more than de minimis, then that is run back through the board for that particular district. The invoices are prepared on a periodic basis and reviewed by whomever the board of a particular district designates. I don't know what that process is for PEN 2, but for MCDD, for instance, I typically review those invoices, and if I have questions, then refer them to either other staff or the whole board. Typically, the service is provided and then the invoice issued. That was one of your questions. Is it pre-approved? Yes. And with changes, again, if there's a deviation from scope that's more than de minimis, then that's reviewed with the district board prior to such work being undertaken. So, Peggy, anything there that you would add or elaborate on?
No, I think you summarized it beautifully.
So Ernest, did I catch all of the questions? Sorry if I missed one.
Question is that who defines de minimis? Because your version of de minimis could be $100. My version of de minimis could be 1,000. So
Right, right.
If it is substantially different than let me step back. When we have a capital project or a unique project and we have provided the board with an estimate of cost, any changes in that, and I would say anything within $1,000 may not go back to the board, but anything greater than that goes back to the board for their approval.
So is that $1,000, is that based on a prior agreement? Because sort of what you're saying is that the $1,000, anything less than 1,000 is considered de minimis. Would that be correct?
When we're talking about capital projects, that generally is de minimis, because when I refer to capital projects, I'm talking about large investments that we're making throughout the organization. If it's a change in, let's say we had planned to take out, we'd had a request to take out trees, and we had notified the board that our estimate was within a certain amount. And we were informed later that it was going to cost us dramatically more. We go back to the board to notify them. But I'm a little uncomfortable giving an exact number because it really just is contingent upon the scope of the project itself. Generally, if anything is 10% out of what was originally anticipated, that would be something we would take back to the board for approval.
Okay, so if I'm understanding you, you're saying anything below 10% of what was quoted is considered de minimis.
Yeah, I guess that would be probably the right way to say that.
Okay, and then you also said that the invoices are reviewed periodically. How is periodically defined? Is it a month? Is it 2 months?
Generally, it's monthly,
It's monthly?
sometimes quarterly.
And I would actually add to that those invoices are reviewed internally by staff, and then goes to the boards, and they have to be reviewed not only by our accounting staff and finance staff, but then goes to our executive team for review, and then to the board members for review. Actually goes to the review for the board members, and then it comes back to us for final signature of payment.
Okay, so prior to the invoice going out on a monthly basis, is reviewed and approved by, accounting as well as the board prior to the invoice being submitted. Is that correct? Is that accurate? Meaning that prior to an invoice being submitted is reviewed internally. After it is approved internally, then it is approved by the board, then it is issued to the drainage districts that's actually contracted for the services. Is that correct?
Could you restate that? I'm a little confused on.
Well, based on what you said, is that if an invoice is going to be issued, it is reviewed.
Oh, okay. I'm always thinking about invoices we receive and payments we pay out. Invoices that go out to individuals, I would have to look at our accounting team to determine that.
Okay, so that was essentially my question. What is your process for issuing invoices to services that you provide? So to the point that you just made, as far as looking at invoices you're receiving in, what is your outgoing services? As an example of that would be, if you are issuing services to say Pin 1 or Pin 2, what is your process for issuing those services that you provide? Now, is it that, to the point that I think the board president made, is there's an agreement of what the services are going to cost. And if the services is less than 10%, it is considered de minimis. Therefore, you do not have to make the board that is going to be receiving the services aware of a change in pricing as long as it's less than 10%. And that relates to special projects, like you say, capital projects, which are much larger, it's less than 1,000. So I would assume the smaller projects would be 10% or less. If it is more than 10%, then you would go back to that board for approval before you issue the services, since it is greater than 10%. Is that fair?
I don't know that that's an accurate assessment with respect to invoices for services that we are providing. And I would suggest this group to take this question back from you, Ernest, get it in writing, and we'll consult with our financial team. I do not believe that for invoices of services that are being provided, that the board approves it, because the extent of the contract is laid out. It's laid out in the contract. So what is your specific question? I know that you are asking with respect to the potential Pen 2 agreement with you. in terms of the pumping in your neighborhood. I'm not quite understanding how that relates to the MCDD board here.
Well, it relates to the MCDD board because you provide a service and you charge for that service.
Okay,
So if Pen 2 is purchasing a service from you, then
okay,
my question is around your billing of that service that you actually provide. That's
okay.
how it actually relates.
Great. Then I think we'll need to
Good
bring in
clarify.
our financing folks to answer that question for you, because those are not board questions.
Yeah.
But
And-
ultimately, to that point, the board is ultimately responsible though, right? Because there's a contract
We
of
are,
service with MCDD. So you signed to the point I think Mike made a little bit earlier, is that Pen 2 and MCD have a contractual agreement. That was a contractual agreement between Pen 2 and MCDD. So ultimately, you sort of are responsible. Maybe the finance team knows the details, but ultimately the board's responsible.
They are responsible, but they're not responsible for the detail, because those details are left within the administrative discretion of the executive director and her financing team. We only take to the board to the extent there is a need to significantly or terminate the relationship for whatever reason. It is not within the board's purview to answer those specific questions.
And if the board doesn't know, then you're exactly right. It's a question to the finance team, but the finance team is on the call. So therefore, I have to direct the question to the board, who in turn redirects that question to the finance team to actually get the answer, correct?
Yeah, we'll work on that. We need to move on to other agenda items. We've certainly gone past the 3 minutes, and we'll take this question back. Staff will respond in writing, and then to the extent that we need to elaborate more, we can engage further. So thanks.
And then one final question from an information perspective. If I wanted to see those invoices, is there a form that you fill out to review those?
So there's a public records request that you can make if you'd like, to the extent that the invoices concern your specific service we are providing, you should be getting those.
No, not getting those, but I will make a request though. So that was the answer to my question.
Okay,
All right.
Emily can, if you want, you can follow up with Karen on the public records request process.
And it would be great if you could provide that list of questions that you raised here as well, so that we can get those back to you in writing.
I most certainly will.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I think our interest is to try to answer your questions as clearly and accurately as we can. But at this point, we need to move on to some other business and
Well, Mike, I appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any other public testimony? Not hearing any. Let's move along then to the environmental briefing. Carrie, you're up.
Okay. Yeah, it's nice to see everybody. We can change gears, and this is, I know I've been in front of this board before, but the first time I've been able to provide sort of a comprehensive briefing of the environmental program at MCDD, which has been in my purview to create, and also a little bit about the natural resource context that the MCDD's environmental program is in. Apologies in advance to Ken, who's heard this pretty much verbatim 2 days ago, and also to Corky, who's heard a different variation of it a couple weeks ago. My hopes here, I'll share my screen if I'm able. Yes, so objectives today: provide an overview of the environmental program, provide a summary of the natural resource conditions and some of the ways that our work really specifically interacts with the natural environment, to then talk into some next steps for the program, specifically recommending the development of an environmental policy. I wanted to start with, why does MCDD have an environmental program? And the first reason is that it is good business. We move water around. We move water around on our own behalf and on behalf of the other districts, and that is an inherently environmental activity. And it also puts us very, very frequently in the business of getting permits and operating within a pretty complex web of the regulatory system at the local, state, and federal level. So being intentional, being strategic, being expert about the impacts that we create, the opportunities that we create, and the way we navigate the regulatory system helps us deliver our service and do our job. At MCDD, it is an organizational value to consider our impact on the environment. That's a statement that very clearly says to me, we can't always take the most protective activity, but we can consider, we can understand our impact, and we can act accordingly. And that really goes to a number of things, but we have a lot of partners. We have our assessment payers. We have nonprofit and community groups that have environmental values, who utilize the waterways and other recreational spaces in the district. And so considering our impact on the environment is out of respect for the values that they held and the interests that they're pursuing. And then lastly, we have an environmental program because that's where the district is headed. The words on the slide here are at some point verbatim from the new district legislation: to contribute to improved water quality, fish and wildlife habitat, floodplain restoration, and landscape resilience are among the purposes of the new district. So we are not that district yet today. We have different and more limited authorities, but there are some ways that we can act on our programs today within our authorities today that help build the capacity and the processes that staff will need to be successful as that transition occurs. I'm going to zoom back a little bit for a minute here, just to be specific about what I mean when I say natural resources or environment. Those are terms that are used in a whole bunch of different ways, depending on which group of people you're talking to, and some of the ways that most specifically comes up for us in our work. So the managed floodplain, previously an unmanaged, a natural floodplain with dynamic set of rivers and lakes and channels and water levels going up and down and land and water changing place from time immemorial until the installation of the levees. And also, since time immemorial, this is a place where Native people have and continue to live. And you're going to hear a lot more about that from Dr. David Lewis at the format in a couple weeks. So suffice it to say, Indigenous people have always lived in our district. Now, the 100 years since the levees have been put in have seen incredible transformation of this space, and a lot of which are part of the legacy of the landscape that we work in today. From that original dynamic landscape to an agricultural one, and then on to the mix of commercial, industrial, and residential areas that are in MCDD and in the other districts that we manage on behalf today. And I feel like one of the ways that for me is the easiest to think through the way that legacy shows up is the city's watershed report card scores. So they're on the right-hand side of the screen right here. The hydrology score, the C+ there, is reflecting pros and cons, right? It's reflecting that we have an open stream channel, which is not a given, particularly for urban streams, many of which in even other parts of Portland are pretty much entirely within pipes, or in other major metropolitan areas like LA in straightened and channelized channels, and concrete lined channels. So we do have this open natural waterway, and we do have a portion of the watershed in Pen 1 and Pen 2 that is open to tidal influence. And the rest, the other side of the coin, is the highly managed nature of the hydrology in MCDD and SDIC, highly managed by us. Water quality is B-, which is not where you want to end up, but is a really good place to be right now for this watershed. And for the majority of the 20th century, the Columbia Slough was treated the way a lot of rivers have been, which is as a place to take waste away, or to think that it will take waste away. There was a discharge of untreated sewage, industrial waste, untreated stormwater for a very long time before the installation of the city's first wastewater treatment plant, for the passage of the Clean Water Act and DEQ's cleanup program, which we participate in. So there have been tremendous gains in water quality in the Columbia Slough. but the sediments in the bottom of the slough and in some of our ditches have those contaminants from the last 100 years within the sediment there. So we do still carry the legacy of those past practices at the same time as we've seen tremendous gains. The habitat and fish and wildlife scores are quite low. I think this picture to some extent kind of says it all, right? This is one of the most heavily developed watersheds in our state. And so there is a lot of area that is prioritized for our economic activity, for transportation, for residential activity. And while there are also some really wonderful natural areas throughout the slough, there is not, relatively speaking, a lot of habitat for terrestrial species. And for aquatic species, we have some barriers for fish passage into MCDD at the cross levee and then also into SDIC. So migratory fish can only use a portion of the slough watershed. And if they could pass through to the middle and upper slough, the water quality conditions, the oxygen levels and temperature levels would be detrimental when they got there. So those scores are, you know, a glass 1/4 full or 3/4 empty. There's a lot of opportunity there, or there's a lot of challenges there in that in particular. Next, I'm going to go through particular resource types and how our staff interact with them. And then I'll pause for questions before we talk more about the policy. Riparian vegetation. First up, it's ecologically very important. These are the forests that are next to streams that provide a lot of water quality benefit and habitat coverage for aquatic and terrestrial species. There are a lot of limitations to how we can have riparian vegetation, particularly on the levees, and because of the core standards. But there are other places in the slough where we do have the species listed on the slide here. And they can benefit us when they provide shade and reduce the presence of aquatic weeds that clog the pump stations. And they can be challenging for us when it blocks access to the slough to remove blockages, or when those trees in fact fall into the slough and create a blockage for conveyance. All these middle slides here are from the Columbia Slough Watershed Council, so thanks to them, to Max Samuelson in particular, for providing them. The next slide is our uninvited vegetative guests, the invasive species, which can also provide a barrier to getting down to the water if we need to access it to clear blockages, especially like the Himalayan blackberry. Invasive species also tend to create a monoculture and have fewer wildlife and water quality benefits as compared to the riparian forest collection that I showed in the previous slide. And I didn't mention on the invasives, I already mentioned the in-water aquatic invasives that can be block water from getting into the pump stations and create a lot of work for our crew if they need to clean them out. Next, we have reptiles, 5 species of reptiles in the slough. The top right, the red-eared slider, is the reptilian uninvited guest. That's an invasive species that we sometimes might handle and give to Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. On the right side, the western painted and western pond turtle are both sensitive species. The western painted turtle occurs in really high densities in the Peninsula Drainage Canal, and folks who like turtles and are passionate about turtle conservation get pretty excited about the turtle population that's in that area. So a regional and statewide hotspot for those animals. 12 native species of fish use the slough at some point in their life cycle. The ones that are most relevant for our operational and just day-to-day activities are the threatened and endangered ones. So the listed salmonid species that can't make it into the middle and upper slough, but anytime we do in-water work on the Columbia side or in the lower slough, we consult with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, or sorry, National Marine Fisheries Service before that work happens, to make sure that we're not adversely impacting the threatened and endangered species. Our mammals in the slough, the American beaver is the one that comes up the most in terms of our desire to convey water and their desire to stop water. And we have best management practices for how do we live together, because it's kind of like the riparian forests, where these are animals that provide a lot of ecological benefit and also can be challenging. So how do we make sure that there's space for both of us in this watershed? It takes a little extra effort, but it is something that we can and are trying to do. Got these bats. Bill told me before the meeting he does not think they are cute. I think they are quite cute. There are 7 species of bat, all of which can be found in Smith and Bybee, and probably so many more places. I got to monitor bats when I was in college, and they had a device that could hear the sounds that they put out. You think you're in a quiet forest, and it is just lit up because they are up there echolocating all over the place. So 7 species of bats in our watershed. And the last one I'll mention is birds. So over 200 species of birds that a skilled observer could hear or see in the slough in a given year. The Anna's hummingbird comes by the office all the time. That was one of the high points of my and Casey Short's office, was we had a little hummingbird feeder, and they'd come fight over the hummingbird feeder every day. And the street-horned lark is a endangered species. It can be found in MCDD on Broughton Beach and the PDX airfield. And other notables, there's a large great blue heron rookery on the Heron Lakes golf course, for which I assume it is named. And birds are just one of those, I was going to say animals, but 200 species of animals that people really connect with and come to some of the natural areas and recreation areas in the slough to see and hear. And so what I hope you take away, because that's kind of the end of my rapid tour to natural resources in the slough and some of the ways we interact with them, is that the watershed is a place that has absorbed a lot of impacts from the other uses and other priorities that we utilize this landscape for. And it's also a place with a lot of opportunity. It's some of our water quality challenges and other resource challenges can have environmental justice impacts as well, where low impact and communities of color are more heavily impacted by, say, a low tree cover that makes hot days hotter and can increase heat related stress or hospitalizations, or the contaminated sediments in the slough that might be ingested at a much higher rate by people using subsistence fishing and supplementing their diet with fish from the slough. I'm going to pause. Any questions before I move on into sort of the other half of the presentation, which is our current services and a policy and a proposal for developing a policy? All right, hearing none. Here's one of the ways that I describe the environmental services that the district provides. This was going to be in your packet with more description and examples of each one. I want to highlight right now just that a lot of these are things that were happening already. That project managers were already doing, and not necessarily calling them an environmental program. But because our work is inherently environmental, these are things that came up and needed to be done and helped us do our job, getting permits, evaluating strategies to reduce impacts or make up for our impacts and utilize and work with nature in other places, providing natural resource projects like replanting trees, or we have a grant related to the Columbia Children's Arboretum for removing invasive species and planting native vegetation. But I have been able to kind of wrap my arms around them and call them the environmental program and be more strategic about where are we growing these different things and how do we make sure that they're delivering a high value for our staff and our assessment payers. The environmental services, and these are some of the successes. One that we have and may have maintained programmatic permits for our routine maintenance activities from DSL and the Army Corps, and are building out templates to help staff quickly understand their permitting obligations, document them in a repeatable way that we can see later on, and providing education sessions. I have already done a couple to inform the entire staff about what our permits cover, what it means to use them, and support. These are things that they need to do their jobs. We have best management practices for turtles and for beavers. And I think this one's pretty exciting. I was just talking to Dave Helzer from BES a little before this about a pilot program to, once we've gone through all of our ways to try and live with beaver on the landscape, potentially move some animals to watersheds where they're part of ecological restoration. And in between, they'd get veterinary care from professionals at the zoo to make sure that they're healthy and have their best chance of success. So that's something we hope to pilot this summer, even, and have been working in collaboration with those agencies to make possible. Mapping and controlling aquatic invasives. This is also something we co-fund with Bureau of Environmental Services, and which I think has been really successful. There are, last year alone, 3 aquatic invasive species that we identified and eradicated before they could get established. So able to really literally nip things in the bud and save money before they get out of control. There's also, the figures I know, and this particular one are like, there's some ditch systems in Penn 2 that are down 90% of the presence of certain aquatic invasives. So the partnership with the city has been very successful there. And I think it's something that is doing good for the environment and for our pump station and our crew. We also, every year, I've been pumping down the slough to improve water temperature. And this year we're working with BES staff to do that in a way that's more designed as an experiment to help understand what the ecological benefits are of pumping. And I'm gonna, I guess, I kind of can't tell how much time I have now because we started at a different time, but maybe I'll just pop on to the next bit in hopes of making up a little bit of.
Carrie, I think there's about 7 minutes left.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So the last thing I wanted to talk about or just propose to you all is to develop an environmental policy. And the idea here is that it would set the high-level sideboards for staff in making decisions and investments related to natural resources. We are increasingly living in 2 worlds here, where we have drainage districts today world and urban flood safety and water quality district tomorrow world. And for me, I think we do want to, work on and think about what that new district can and will do. We also want to very much operate within the legal authorities that we have and the direction and priorities of the drainage districts today when we're making decisions related to natural resources. And so what I'm proposing is that we would seek volunteers, ideally one from each board, and so far each of the other boards have been able to identify a volunteer to work with me, to work, and I'll also be collaborating with Hong and our legal team and getting input from our staff to bring a draft policy back to the individual boards in July, at which point, or excuse me, August, at which point they would be presented to each board individually and then coming into a format. And the ideal outcome is that we have the same policy adopted in all 4 districts. So I don't need a resolution, but I would be looking for informal agreement to proceed, and either now or as a follow-up to this meeting, if there is someone who is interested and willing to provide some review along the way, volunteer to support the effort. And I'm also happy to answer any questions.
Carrie, good presentation. Thank you. You condensed a lot of information in a short time. Would that policy be specifically oriented to the current district and sort of articulate how those rails might change?
Definitely oriented towards the current district. I think it's something that will be very helpful for the urban flood safety and water quality district to see here's where we are today, here's where the lane is, and we can understand the way that our current authorities in support those sidebars, and use it as a foundation for the conversation about what should a policy be for the new district board. So I don't know that we'll necessarily draw a line from here to there, but I think it will be useful to see in writing this current state.
I think an important piece, if I can add, is we really look at this as kind of that foundation and guardrails for the current districts, but as Carrie said, it's kind of a foundation for some of the work that's going to go on with the new district as it moves forward.
Yeah, this is Corky. Carrie, you seem to be really on top of the differences between environmental policy at MCDD and a future environmental policy of the urban district. Given the fact that you've got a good basis there, I think this is an ideal platform to make that transition to the new district. I think it's a great idea.
Thank you.
Yeah, I made a similar comment, Corky, when Carrie presented it to SDIC board. I think it's a great way to cover and look to the future of what the ultimate district's going to look like, and incorporating more of the environmental, sustainability issues and into the future, and this sets us up really nicely. And lastly, I just want to say, Carrie, thanks for your enthusiasm for all this work. It's contagious. Great job on the presentation.
Thank you, Ken.
Yeah, I'll echo, excellent job on the presentation. And I'm very happy to be MCDD's board member to advise you if no one else wants to do it. And if someone else wants to do it, then we have to have a discussion.
I was wondering if we all wanted to do that. So.
I know.
Arm wrestle.
I actually thought of Nancy first for this. I think you do a great job.
I would love to do it, but I think Nancy is a great choice for it.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I echo that. I think also as a board, we can take some comfort in knowing that a lot of what's been happening in the district conforms to some good environmental practices. This is, in my view, evolving rather than pivoting or revolution.
I also look forward to an evaluation, kind of a scorecard, a district scorecard as opposed to the city scorecard. The city scorecard is really helpful, but the assumptions behind that, I think, are don't fit with us quite as well as they could. So I think if we kind of evaluate it from our perspective, I think that could be really helpful, and I think that could be helpful, good insight for the city to have as well.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
point.
So thinking about how do we define success, and what are our, how are we measuring progress?
Yeah, and recognizing our boundaries and ground rules and authorities are different.
Mhm.
Yeah, and even at a basic level, the fish and wildlife metric is largely based on anadromous fish, migrating fish, which only occur in the lower slough. But we actually have some really nice species that you listed, the turtles, for example, which I think we would get a better score on if we were to include turtles. And it works with MCDD's mission. So I think I like your idea, Corky.
Okay, anything else for
Thank you
Carrie?
so much.
Not well done, thanks. So move along to Bill and assets and liabilities. You got a tough act to follow, Bill.
Yep, absolutely. Well, good afternoon, all. I'm sorry I don't have any pictures of birds or turtles in my presentation, but you'll be equally as energized when you look at the financial information as they roll through. So hold on to your chairs. So let me share my screen here with you. Hopefully the slide will come up momentarily.
It's up.
Okay, very good.
Right.
So you all have seen similar presentations about this assets and liabilities project we've been talking about for several months now. Corky has been very gracious with his time to participate with our board working group. So he's seen versions of this presentation before, as well as a couple others I noticed who are on the call today. You also have this information in your packet, so I may scoot through these slides a little faster if you hadn't had this, but it was a timely update, and I want to make sure I get some feedback from y'all as we move forward. Just as a reminder, the Assets and Liabilities Project is there to create an equitable framework to inventory our assets and liabilities as this board and other boards of the special districts up in North Portland are in the process of transitioning to the new urban district, and as specified by ORS 550. Part of that process to transition requires us to transfer all of your duties, assets, and liabilities. And so this is what this project is about. And we've been happy to have some folks from all the boards who can participate and give us some guidance and on information we're trying to package together, and suggestions on how we can adjust that a little bit for presentations. Wanted to give you a sense on where we're at in the project. Of course, we're in March, and we've done some work to date, as you've been tracking, both through documentation and presentations. We're at a point of applying some of the evaluation methods and finishing up the assets that we need to use as part of our inventory. The main reason I wanted to bring up this slide is twofold. One, the board working group will likely meet 2 more times this spring. But for the rest of you, you will see, the goal is that you will see a full draft of the project deliverable in May. And so the intent, if I send that to you ahead of time, is to start getting feedback from you prior to and during that meeting, as well as afterwards. So I can cobble together the responses from your group as well as the other boards to refine that project deliverable for potential approval in late June, with the intent to try to deliver to the new board in early July. So I'm going through 3 primary pieces of this project today. One is the table of contents, what's going to be in the deliverable. And 2, diving a little deeper into the 5th and 6th items on this slide. So the table of contents is fairly straightforward. There'll be an executive overview along with the purpose and background. The latter is going to be information you've already seen to some level, but it'll just be in a narrative manner. The 3rd section deals with one of the 3 legs of the stool that is part of the transfer, but we really haven't talked too much about that in this setting, and that's the duties of your district. Those duties need to be enumerated and understood by the new urban district in order for them to receive that set of duties and continue them forward. And we felt that putting that in a 3rd section fairly early in the report would provide a good foundation, if you will, for some of the numbers that come later. We've already talked about definitions and valuation or other methodologies. It's in section 4 back in January, and section 5 follows from that, and it outlines and summarizes the sort of the classic set of assets and liabilities that we identify in our financial records. And particularly, those are highlighted in our auditor's report. So that's a focus of section 5, but section 6 expands upon that by identifying other capital needs that we have talked about in past, but the new urban district board may not fully appreciate quite yet. So, and these are items that may not be on the assets and the financial records of the assets and liabilities. Examples include feasibility, the Corps feasibility study recommendations, the FEMA levy accreditation projects, the drainage master plan projects that are out several years, and so on and so forth. So I'll continue moving down that path and touch on this in a couple more slides. Of course, we'll have some appendices that dive deep into the numbers for those who really love getting into that minutia. This slide shows an initial view of what could be included in section 5. The numbers here represent the values that are in the 2019 auditors reports for each of the 4 districts that are shown. And my intent here is to try to compare apples to apples as best I could. Before the final draft is put together, I'll make sure this will be vetted thoroughly with our new CFO and the finance group, as well as potentially an outside consultants. But you can already see a couple of things in here that may draw your attention. One, up towards the top under current assets, Pen 2 has a mysterious inventory category, which makes sense, I'm sure, in their auditor's report, but there's no separate category like that in the other 3 districts. So I want to make sure that's well vetted, and if appropriate, maybe that information gets lumped into a different category. You also will know that under MCDD, of course, there's a set of liabilities that the other districts don't have, and that's because MCDD has staff. That includes accrued vacations payable, as well as the pension obligations, and so forth. So the intent here is to update this information with the 2020 auditors report values and provide a starting point for how to interpret some of this information. I think I'll be leveraging Corky and other board members to help identify what appropriate things to highlight as part of that narrative and interpreting this information.
Hey, Bill,
Yeah.
before you leave that, could you give us an example of some of the non-depreciable assets versus depreciable assets? I'm certain that our equipment in the case of MCDD is in a depreciable asset, but maybe you could elaborate.
Yeah, sure. Your instinct is correct. Equipment, anything that's been installed, or pump stations, or example, or vehicles, all are considered depreciable assets. A couple of examples of non-depreciable assets include land or projects in construction. So they haven't yet been fully completed and thus been able to begin depreciating. So those are 2 examples there. And I can build, that's ironically, that's the exact same question that Pen 1 had earlier today. So I will make sure that comment is in the narrative when it's all said. Other comments or questions about this particular slide? The last slide I have for you for this segment deals with section 6. So these are the other considerations, if you will. So these are items that are outside of the auditor's report. But as you know, and as staff know, there are many things that we're looking forward to be proactive and making improvements upon our system, both the levy and the drainage components. One, of course, is the course feasibility study projects. I've showed a total here, but I'm going to be breaking it out by district. FEMA levy accreditation projects, some of them are already in the feasibility study, but those that are not, I want to make sure they're listed here. There are two types of capital improvements that are listed. One deals with what are called major capital improvements. Others are called operating capital. We'll specify what that threshold to indicate which investments falls in major or which ones fall in operating. It could be like $1 million or so. That could be the threshold between the two. But examples of major capital improvements certainly would be the pump station 1 pump replacement projects that you just finished, as well as the trash rake project that you just finished. Operating capital requirements may be rebuilding rebuilding a pump or a motor, or you don't have relief wells, but there may be some ditch improvements that need to be made in MCDD, or some smaller pipe replacements that's for pipes that you might own. So those are lower dollar amounts, but known capital improvements. And if you start accumulating all the needs, the assets you have, the dollar amounts start becoming larger. So that's the next category. Capital contributions from agency partners is something that the board working group wanted to make sure that we highlighted. These are examples include the City of Portland's contributions to operating capital for Pen 1. City of Troutdale and the Port have both contributed money to SDIC for the Trip Weir and the Drainage Master Plan in some cases. So I'm struggling a little bit on what other, and I'm sure you guys can think of right off the hand. Maybe there's some examples that the City of Portland or others have provided for MCDD per se, but we'll go through that exercise and make sure that that's enumerated here. Finally, we're going to be recommending that we identify a list of capital improvements of assets that are owned by others. So those that we feel are not owned by the district, and wouldn't necessarily specify who they are owned by, but they're not owned by the district, but they're integral to the drainage system or part of the levee system. So examples of these might be the culvert under Northeast 82nd Avenue. We know that's in bad shape. It's a big culvert and it's under a public right of way. Not sure if it's ODOT's or the city's, but it needs attention. And we want to make sure that the new urban district knows about these assets. Because at the very least, we're going to be coordinating with those agencies for replacement, and depending on the situation, provide financial support as well, depending on the situation. Other examples include on the levee side, there are a number of outlets that bore through the Penn 1 Columbia River levee along Marine Drive. I think there are 30 plus of them, 30 plus culverts underneath them. BES is has a project right now to rehab a number of them. Graphic Packaging is doing something there. But there are others that are not being addressed immediately. So those are types of examples of assets that we don't own, but they're part of the system and we need to pay attention to in order for us to properly do our work. As an engineer, I hate giving numbers out. They're so early in the planning process. And this is no different, but I wanted to give you a flavor of what this looks like. Do not hang your hat on these numbers. I should have used some of the features of the PowerPoint to have a flashing note at the bottom saying notes, these are draft, duplicate costs are in here, and so on and so forth. So the numbers will look different, but we're talking about certainly over $100 million of need, even though the numbers will change. That is the extent of my presentation. Let me circle back up to the schedule to make sure you understand how we're moving forward. And I welcome any questions or comments you might have, how we can best position the information to make a meaningful project deliverable.
And if you don't mind, this is Corky. I'll just jump in to start off real
Please.
quick, because this has been a really interesting process and a difficult process. There were early on, I had to figure out what kind of evaluation process we'd use. There are big differences in that. It's so rarely done. Hats off to Bill. We've always known he's a good engineer. What we didn't know is how good of an accountant he is. He's, really done a great job of managing that process. It's coming along really well. I think as we move forward, maybe one of the big questions we're gonna have to wrestle with is when we look at a lot of what you just saw, the current assets and liabilities that we have, it's fairly straightforward, I think. And there's not a lot of argument over, well, this is how much value is at MCDD versus STIC, so forth. But as we start moving toward levy recertification, there are big differences in the cost of the projects in different districts. So that'll probably be the big question and maybe the big point of argument that we might have moving forward. But I think in my mind, there's two things we're trying to deal here. One is, what's the best number? What's the best way to get to a number where we can level out, each district as we go into a merge? And the other is, how do we make sure that everybody agrees with that? How do we make sure that everybody feels comfortable with whatever number we've come up with? So that's my soapbox. Again, thanks, Bill.
Yep. Thank you, Corky. And Janet is on the line, so I will appreciate the engineer comment, but know that I'm nowhere close to an accountant.
Michael, nice to be presented. Any other questions for Bill on this topic before he moves on to his next one?
Yeah, just one quick question on the Bill. This is great. Thanks for presenting this. My question is, how are you going to keep the numbers fresh and updated? One thing we have at the port we struggle with is we get estimates and they're stale the minute we get them, and then escalation costs and things escalate disproportionately than inflation often. Based on commodities like steel or energy prices to move dirt. So how do you keep that updated and fresh?
Yeah, that's going to be an outstanding challenge for us. What we have to do is be transparent. We said, this is the information at this point in time. It's a snapshot. It will change. And it would be advisable for the urban district to revisit this information in a couple of years, just before they finalize whatever revenue tools they are examining, because it definitely will change. One great example that will be missing here is we have no facilities master plan right now, and we desperately need some improvements at the shop. And we're kind of getting squeezed out at our office with the staff that we have. So it's not going to be $100,000 investment. We're probably talking millions to take care of both items. So that's a longer term, but we don't have that in play right now. It is in your current CIP that will be investing in that type of master planning tool, and you'll see that again when budget time comes around in a couple of years. And the other thing with respect to Ken's comments, even some of the information we have is going to be at different time points. So the financial records, for instance, they'll be based upon FY 19-20 data. But the capital projects, they're based upon probably June 2021 data. So we're going to have to make sure that we can represent that clearly enough for others to sort of right size if that's needed in the future. So yeah, it's a great challenge, and obviously it's not something that we struggle with alone, given Ken's comment.
So, Bill, can this presentation be shared with the public? I know you said at the beginning of your presentation you had shared it with the board, but can this be shared with the public?
Yeah, I believe it's a public, yeah, it's part of, it's a public meeting, so it's not a problem. We can work with Emily or whoever else to obtain that information.
Okay.
Peggy, you're muted.
Karen can take, Karen work with him on that as well. She'll be the point of contact.
Okay, great.
Who would she was breaking up just a bit. Who would be the point of contact?
Well, a staff member will reach back out to you with this information. We just got to make sure we coordinate internally, but we'll make sure to circle back with you.
Anything else for Bill on this topic? If not, please bring us up to speed on the PGE substation issue out east.
Right. Let me, this is not an area you folks may recognize right away. Share screen. So this was also part of your meeting packet today. This is the very last page of that PDF file. And this area is out technically in Fairview, located just around Marine Drive and the boundary of your district and SDIC. So there's a cross levee right at this location. So we're just south of Sandy Pump Station. So what happened is, as you probably saw in the meeting notice, that as you know, throughout the 4 districts, MCDD provides vegetation maintenance annually for all of our levee systems and all of the ditch systems that we maintain. And for decades, we've been doing this, including an area that's currently owned by PGE, which is up just south of Marine Drive in Fairview. I'm not sure if you can see my pointer, but it's up in the area where it says proposed RPA tree mitigation planting area. So this stretch right just south of Salmon Creek is something we mow every year, once a year. But this year, what happened is that PGE ended up doing a capital project. And in doing that include this maroon line that you see on the view, and they're upgrading their transmission system. And part of that process, they took out a series of trees, and as many of you know, that requires a permit to do so and then mitigation elsewhere. Because they weren't aware of it, they opted to mitigate all those planted trees right next to Salmon Creek, exactly in the area where we mow. And so when we came through in late September this year, those plants were really young. They were hard to see, and there wasn't enough signage because the PGE felt all of this was on their property. And our crews went through and mowed everything down. So all of their mitigation was lost. And we ended up finding out that it was about just over $18,000 of damage to the mitigation work. So once PGE found out who it was, we definitely owned up to it when we figured out what was happening. We started talking about why this happened and what could be done in its place. Ultimately, we submitted a claim to the MCDD insurance policy to cover the $18,600, and there was change. The exact numbers in your packet. And the reason for doing, even though this is an SDIC, the reason for doing that is because MCDD staff conducted the work on behalf of SDIC. And so we felt that it was appropriate to go under the MCD policy as opposed to the SDIC policy. So Obviously, this is something we don't want to have happen again. We were very surprised when we found out what was happening. So this is, as I said, we've been doing this for decades, and for some reason this changed. In part, there was change in ownership of this parcel back in the mid to late 90s, and PGE hadn't touched that area at all. And so whoever knew about us prior to that in this area had probably moved on. So what do we do different? Well, first, we're working with PGE to find alternative mitigation sites. They still need to do the mitigation. Ideally, the mitigation work is done in the city of Fairview because that's who issued the permit. So we've started examining a couple of different options for them. Their preference is to stay around this area and honestly on their property there. But we have some hurdles we have to go through in order to feel comfortable planting anywhere there. They're talking about planting on the bank of Salmon Creek. And that could work, but I'm nervous about operations doing the work that they're required to do to remove blockages and other things that happen, doing dredging work periodically, and all the things we do as a district. And to do so, you'd have to have an excavator on the bank, and moving things around probably will damage the trees and vegetation. So I'm not as, because of the proximity of that work, I'm not as excited about that location, but Carrie and others in our staff are looking at a couple of different options. So that's one thing we're doing. The second thing we're doing is we're going to be getting an easement. We're going to be working to get an easement with PGE for the area that we mow, as well as Salmon Creek on their property. So we have not only access to this area, but also do maintenance activities moving forward. Thirdly, there is an access point or access route where kind of at the the east end of Salmon Creek there, probably right under the word Salmon Creek. That's actually a property owned by the port. And that is traditionally the 2-track that we use to get onto this site to do our activities, whether it's mowing or maintenance of the channel. And PGE had worked with the port to put some boulders out to prevent the public from getting access to PGE's property there, but that blocks our work. I'm hopeful that if the port has and us can agree upon an easement there, there's an overlay at that particular route that will at least create a flag for the port if someone else approaches them and says, look, can we do something here? And they think, yeah, well, sounds good, but you need to connect with SDIC because they have access in this area. In addition, of course, we're looking at our own internal mowing practices and any inspection work, particularly before we go through and mow. From last year's conversation, we've made some improvement in our inspections and mowing protocols by adding some infrared cameras to our mowers. So folks who happen to be lying down in the tall, thick grass and the levees, hopefully the intent is the camera will pick that warm body up, and so we don't drive over that person by accident. So that's not going to help here because they're plants, but we are going to be looking at inspection protocols here. Finally, development reviews are going to be helpful here too. This project, the one in maroon, was certainly one that went through our development review protocols. Primarily, we were talking about a new pole that is right next to Blue Lake Road, and we were more concerned at the time physically what that pole would do with respect to its proximity to the levee system and how high the lines were on the new pole with respect to the crest of the levee. We wanted them close enough to the levee that would create some problems with us doing our activities at the top of the levee. What we didn't do is make the connection between that little site right here to the very rest of the property and ask ourselves, are there any other activities we perform on that property, and do we have the right easements to do those activities? In past, staff of the district has leveraged and interpreted our ORS statutes to say we can come on property, any property based on our ORS allowment. But currently, and I think properly, we're being more proactive about getting easements. So there's legal documents beyond the ORS statute to say, yes, we're allowed to access A, or B, we're allowed to do maintenance there. That didn't happen in this case. And so we need to be better as staff to identify that. And I don't know whether or not that would have saved this issue or not, but certainly another example of what we'll be doing differently moving forward. A lot of information there. Hopefully you had a chance to glance at the meeting materials ahead of time. Some of this is a repeating of that, but if you have any questions about what happened or what steps we take, please let me know. It looks like Nancy raised her hand. You're muted.
Okay, so I'm muted and I'm trying to put my hand down, but I can't. So I'll do that later. So I just wondered, another thing that we could do as a district is to reach out to property owners periodically. I don't know if it'd be annual or what, but if we could say, hey, remember this piece of property that you own is also a levy, and here's our list of things you can and can't do on it. I feel like we have all this information. I don't know that we do mail it out, and if we do, maybe it's just pretty generic. But could we do some sort of mail merge where you take the person's address and the property that's with the levy and show them a little picture, and they'll go, oh, that's where we're going to put our mitigation, right? Yeah, I'll throw that out for the staff, and you guys can keep it or toss it.
Okay, no, I like the idea, and we've talked about something similar in past. As just a question of how quickly it bubbles up on the priority list. This may be the instigator to do something that more quickly. Honestly, we've relied on development reviews and projects like the feasibility study to help, and other projects, not just the big one there, to help with those easement pieces. But your logic is sound, and it would be of value to reach out to those folks.
And Bill, this is the second time I heard it, but I heard a little more this time. But in the last SDIC meeting, I mentioned, I think the development review is the #1 defense against this happening. Because what you have with, even if you were to send a letter to adjoining landowners, a lot of times complicated agencies like PGE or Pacific Core, it goes to corporate and it never gets to the engineering level, and they plan the project and they don't know, and so the only one that can really flag that is, one, if you see development notifications, and two, any visual cues or public cues about permits taken. So just something to think about how that can be better coordinated. And I think that's going to be one of the #1s, and then the education piece as well.
Yeah, Kenneth, I agree. Anything else for Bill on that topic?
Yeah, Bill, how's the tone of conversation with PGE?
It's respectful at this point. They're obviously disappointed that the mitigation is gone. And they seem to be receptive to our interests. As I mentioned earlier, they have a preference to do the mitigation on site, and that's challenging for us to put it back in the same location. So they're working with us, and I have no complaints about it, about our coordination with them.
Good, because I suspect, as we in the future, we're not going to get fewer of these sort of incidents. So it's a great opportunity to work with them and work out some better procedures, which you guys are doing. Thanks.
Yeah, Yeah, this is a great example of actually doing work with the same staff earlier on a couple of development reviews. So I already knew some of the folks that I'm coordinating with now, and we've developed a little bit of a rapport. And yeah, so that's helping, but it's a tough nut to crack.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Let's move
Thank you.
along to Peggy's briefing, and hopefully you can weave into that where we stand on the executive director recruiting.
That was on the top of the list. Yes, I know it's on the top of everyone's list. I just want to let you know we are in the middle of budget. We're commencing our budget activity, but most importantly, I wanted to give you an update on the executive director recruiting. We got a really good pool of participants. We had over 30 applicants by the time we closed. We are in the process of narrowing that down, and we'll be having interviews on the first round of interviews, the 17th and 18th of March, and then anticipated the second round on March 31st as we narrow the pool down. And then there will be, after that second round with the executive search committee, we will then have an opportunity for the ED to meet with the deputy directors and staff before a final decision is made. So it's looking, I'm very impressed with the pool. I'm very impressed. I also want to just give you an update. We did submit the letter and financial certification to the Corps for the feasibility study, and that will be heading to DC after it's packaged with the rest of the information from the district office. Also wanted to give you a legislative update. I think we've talked to you all about Senate Bill 622, which is seeking lottery funds for lottery bond money for grants for drainage districts across the state. We're asking for a $10 million. We were represented by Mark Landauer, Lou Fredericks, and Councillor Craddock I think it was last week before. It's all kind of getting to be a blur, but it went very well. We will know within, it's a little while before we will go to the Ways and Means, but that's what we're anticipating. Of that $10 million grant, those grant dollars, 60% goes to rural communities, but 10% is open to, or 20% is open, 40%, sorry, is open to the urban districts. Now I'm going to slip a little more into the urban flood safety water quality district updates. We met with Michael Jordan, Evan, I, and Mark Landauer met with Tina Speaker Kotak last Friday to give her, as we have discussed before, seeking potentially up to $2 million this year, the next biennium, to support the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District. I want to first tell you she was extremely impressed by the work that staff has accomplished in a 10-month period and made that very clear. She also understood the importance of what we're doing and seemed receptive of the 2 million request. It may not be quite that much, but I feel cautiously optimistic as we move forward. Next, we also met with Evan and Colin, and I met with Chris Cummings at Business Oregon. Our concern is the $500,000 grant that the urban district got in the last biennium. We will have some money still unspent by the end of June, and we wanted to confirm whether that money could be carried over. That was, I feel optimistic that that is not an issue. So there'll be money carried over from that. And then thirdly, the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District is going through a budget amendment to accept the $2,832 that the LRC granted them this year out of their budget. So we are, and we are also pursuing lines of credit from some potential partners. So that financially, I'm feeling pretty positive about where next year and the next 4 years is going to go. I also want to let you know there's been a replacement on that board. Originally, Mike Weatherby was a representative from Fairview. The city council identified Eric Moeller as a replacement for him. So Eric Moeller will be the representative from Fairview on that board. And then because Mike Weatherby was also the vice chair, they selected a new vice chair who is Steve Fancher from the city of Gresham, Public Works Director, who's really, is a good fit. They are now going through adopting their financial policy so that they have that prepared for their next budget. They have, they're going to be moving forward. The Mission Vision Value Committee will start to meet, and that I think is a huge step. It helps to provide kind of the foundation of the values of this new district, and kind of provides what I call guide rails as they move forward on their equity committee, their environmental committee, and most importantly, I shouldn't say most importantly, but the revenue development committee, in which everything feeds into. So that's my update. I don't know if anybody has any questions, but that's it.
Just a question for ease or transparency of information. Are these schedules updated as you get like meetings, committee meetings and other meetings? Are they updated on, would it be our website or does?
They have their own website.
Okay.
And there's two different, when the committees are deliberative, they follow public budget, public meeting laws. So they will be posted, etc. One of the issues that's been discussed is the potential of, after this budget season is over, that they do their urban flood safety, water quality, their full board meeting 1 month and their committee meetings the next. But that's a decision that they will make in the future.
Peggy, any foretelling
question.
about the landowner meeting coming up?
I do not have a whole lot to offer other than it's the end of March 30th, I believe. Karen Carello and Evan really are instrumental in putting that together for us. We will be having talking points and be ready to address this. We'll keep you posted.
Peggy, on your meeting with Tina, I kept waiting for you to say, but it sounds good. Are we anticipating a point where we need to take action, step in?
We're going to be needing to take, we are putting together, we're going to be outreaching to the legislators that are touching our district and putting together a plan on how to move forward. It has been posted on my, I just have not had a chance to read the details of how we're going to move forward, but we will keep you informed. We've wanted to keep this under the radar up to now, but as we begin to reach out, we will be asking support from board members.
Because just make sure everybody understands, without that, there is no money for the urban district. I mean, it's, you know, they're out of money then. So we need it.
Yeah, and that money that the urban district spends is for setting it up, right? So all those board members are volunteer for that district, but But, you know, they have consultants who are coming up with revenue models and all sorts of things. So it has to happen.
Right.
So I appreciate, Peggy, that you're looking into several sources.
Yes. There's about 5 different sources. There's more to come. I don't want to get ahead of my skis on anything.
More buckets.
More buckets.
Okay, good meeting. Anything else for the good of the order?
I
I
believe
think
we have an executive session still.
yes,
Is that correct?
that is correct.
Okay, I will pull up the agenda that has the language on it for the ORS.
Thank you.
And I will move members of the public to the waiting room. And I believe that staff won't need to be in this meeting besides Peggy and Hong. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
And so what I'll do is, here, let me pull up the agenda for the language.
Thank you. I almost have it decided.
There, okay. Is that legible?
Yes, it is. The MCDD board will enter into executive session to discuss confidential legal advice and attorney-client communications not related to litigation pursuant to ORS 40.255, ORS 192.35598, and 192.662F. Hong?
Let me
Great.
pause the recording first and move folks to the waiting room before we get started.
Yeah, I think we still have some members of the public.
And who is 3078 on the phone? Do they need to be moved into the waiting room?
I don't know who that person is, so you probably
Okay.
should.
Oh, that's me. That's me, Ernest.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Bye-bye, Ernest. Thank
So
you.
we're gonna move you
All
into the
right.
waiting room.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and then I'll pause the recording and Peggy, I'll make you host and Hong, you'll be co-host and you'll be able to go into the participants list when it's executive session is finished and then move Ernest back in, start the recording and adjourn the meeting.
Oh, good grief, we have to do all that. Okay. Peggy, do you want to do the introduction to the session?
Yes, and we wanted to cover 2 things, right? Helen?
Oh, the recording is still going and I just
Oh,
realized
do
you'll
I
also
need
have
to-
to move me to the waiting room. I'm sorry about this.
So
We should have a pause or stop recording button on the bottom of the screen.
got it. So
Okay.
let me unpause the recording here.
Yeah,
I
so
just
now there it
Okay.
is. So the recording's back on. We're in regular session and I don't believe there's any further business. So MCDD board is adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
And thank
All
you
right.
for your last meeting.
Yes, well, I'll be at the landlord meeting.
Yeah, the landowner meeting, but thank you.
Right. Thanks, everyone. See ya.